December 2nd, 1967. Skies over Hanoi. A squadron of American F-4 Phantoms, the deadliest fighters ever built. $2.5 million apiece. Cutting-edge radar arrays. 6 air-to-air missiles strapped to each airframe. And facing them, aging Soviet MiG-21S. 1/8 the cost. Primitive radar. 2 missiles. Pilots with a sliver of the flight hours their American counterparts had logged. On any spreadsheet, this is a slaughter. One-sided. Over before it starts. Except the Americans are the ones dying. Vietnamese pilots are dropping Phantoms out of the sky with techniques the Pentagon cannot decode. Strike from beneath, vanish into cloud cover, gone before the Americans even roll into pursuit. And threading through the center of all of it, one pilot. Nguyen Van Cock, son of a rice farmer, 23 years old. Before 1967 ends, he will destroy 9 American aircraft. That number makes him the highest-scoring fighter ace of the entire Vietnam War. How does a man flying a cheaper, slower, less equipped jet outfight the most dominant air force on the planet? What tactics did the Vietnamese stumble onto that American planners had no answer for? And how did the blood spilled in these dogfights reshape aerial warfare for every generation that followed? Nguyen Van Cock came into the world in 1944. Nam Dinh Province, 90 kilometers southeast of Hanoi. His father worked rice paddies. His mother kept chickens. No one in the family had stood within 100 meters of an airplane. Then, in 1963, North Vietnam opened recruitment for its air force. He was 19. He signed up, not out of ideology, not out of duty. He wanted to feel a cockpit around him. 500 young men applied. 30 slots. He earned one. By 1964, he was on a plane to the Soviet Union, a classified airfield near Chkalovsky. This was where North Vietnam's future pilots learned to handle MiG-21S. The program was merciless. The MiG-21 was fast, nimble, and absolutely unforgiving of hesitation. Top speed, 2,100 kilometers per hour. Combat radius, 480 kilometers. Once you engaged in a dogfight, you had 15 minutes of fuel. After that, you either turned for base or you crashed. Soviet instructors drilled a single doctrine into every trainee. Do not get drawn into a prolonged engagement with American planes. They carry superior radar, superior missiles, more fuel in their tanks. Hit hard, vanish harder. By late 1965, Nguyen Van Cock was back on Vietnamese soil. His total flight hours, 120. The average American pilot touching down in Vietnam carried over 500. That gap didn't shake him. He had a method, and he was about to put it against the most powerful air force the world had ever assembled. The F-4 Phantom II was an engineering beast. McDonnell Douglas designed it in the late 1950s with a singular purpose: intercept and annihilate Soviet bombers before they reached American soil. It punched through twice the speed of sound. It could claw its way to 18,000 meters in under 2 minutes. Each airframe ran $2.5 million, roughly 23 million in today's currency. Its AM/APQ-72 radar system could paint a target at 45 kilometers. 6 AIM-7 Sparrow missiles rode under its wings, engineered to acquire enemy aircraft beyond visual range and kill them before the opposing pilot even registered the threat. On paper, no human in any cockpit on Earth should be able to beat this $23 million machine. But the Phantom carried one fatal design flaw: no cannon, no gun of any kind. The engineers at McDonnell Douglas had decided that dogfighting was a relic. The future of air combat was long-range missile duels. Close quarters maneuvering belonged to the past. That assumption was catastrophically wrong. When the F-4 Phantom deployed to Vietnam in 1965, American brass radiated confidence. North Vietnam's entire air force amounted to perhaps 40 planes, a handful of outdated MiG-17S, and a few newer MiG-21S. The US fielded hundreds of Phantoms, crewed by the most elite pilots on the globe. Total air dominance was expected within months. But combat over Vietnam didn't happen at 45 kilometers. It erupted in thick cloud layers, at treetop altitude, in point-blank ambushes where radar returns turned to noise and missile seekers refused to lock. In that kind of fight, the F-4 Phantom wasn't untouchable. It was exposed. Americans labeled it hit and run. The Vietnamese had a different name: guerrilla air warfare. The mechanics worked like this. American strike packages over North Vietnam flew predictable corridors. Waves of F-105 Thunder Chiefs, heavy, bomb-laden attack planes, would push north from airfields in Thailand. F-4 Phantoms would fly escort, holding position above and behind. The Americans carried one decisive edge: airborne radar. That radar could spot enemy aircraft up to 45 kilometers out. Plenty of warning to maneuver, to engage. But radar had a blind spot. Low-flying targets vanished into ground clutter. Clouds blocked the signal entirely. The North Vietnamese intended to exploit both weaknesses. Ground control made the entire strategy possible. Across the country, the North Vietnamese erected a web of early warning radar stations, built under Soviet guidance. These stations tracked American formations the instant they crossed into North Vietnamese airspace. Every reading fed into a central command post buried in Hanoi. Codename Bison. Bison controlled everything. When the MiGs launched, what altitude they flew, what angle they attacked from. MiG pilots didn't make decisions. They obeyed. The plan worked like this. MiG-21s would scramble and immediately drop to low altitude, 500 meters above the ground, sometimes lower. Radars dark, engines silent to American sensors. The MiG-21 was tiny. At low altitude on American screens, it dissolved into ground clutter. Bison would vector the MiGs into attack position using ground-based radar. The fighters would tuck behind clouds, nestle against hillsides, waiting. Above them, American pilots would scan their scopes and see nothing. Then Bison's command would crackle through. Climb and attack. The MiGs would haul back on the stick, afterburners shrieking. They'd punch through the cloud layer directly underneath the American formation. Deep inside the radar blind spot, the world's most sophisticated fighter was naked, defenseless. The F-4's AIM-7 Sparrow missiles needed time to acquire a lock. At close range, in a sudden ambush, that time didn't exist. The MiG-21's K-13 Atto missile had an effective range of just 3 kilometers, but it locked on in 2 seconds. Fire, nose down, vanished back into the clouds before the Americans could process what happened. Total engagement window, 60 to 90 seconds. On paper, the tactic was elegant, ruthless. But combat isn't paper. Could a farmer's son with 120 hours of flight time pull this off against the best trained pilots on Earth? November 28, 1966, 2:14 p.m. Gia Lam Airfield, Hanoi. Nguyen Van Cock has spent 18 months as a combat pilot. 47 sorties behind him. He squeezed the trigger in combat exactly 3 times. Hit nothing. Today, he watches the tactic prove itself for the first time. The alarm cuts through the airfield. American strike package inbound. 12 F-105 Thunder Chiefs with 4 F-4 Phantoms riding escort. Course north. Aimed at the Paul Dummer Bridge. A critical supply artery the Americans have been hammering for weeks. He sprints toward his MiG-21, but he's not the triggerman today. His flight leader, Nguyen Duy Kieu, 3 years of combat under his belt, takes the primary role. Siu Se is wingman. His orders are simple. Hold Kieu's wing. Watch for threats. Learn. Pre-flight checks burn through fast. Fuel, full. Weapons. 2 K-13 atolls on the rails. Cannon, 60 rounds. Radio, live. He cinches the harness. Engine start. The Tumansky R-11 turbojet screams awake. Bison's voice floods his headset. 4 aircraft. Take off immediately. Heading 180. Altitude 500 meters. Radar off. He doesn't question it. He never questions it. The ground controllers hold the full picture. He sees only what the canopy frame allows. They launch. Kiev leads. COSA follows, 2 seconds back. They hug the earth, racing over rice paddies and villages. American radar sweeps medium and high altitude for contacts. Down here, nothing. Ghosts. Bison again. American formation bearing 045. Distance 40 kilometers. Altitude 6,000 meters. Maintain current heading. He glances at his fuel gauge. 12 minutes, maybe. Then he has to turn for home. The MiG-21 was never built for endurance. Declassified Soviet technical manuals put internal fuel capacity at roughly 45 minutes under standard flight conditions. Kick in the afterburner during combat, and that number collapsed to 15 minutes, often less. American pilots knew this. If they could keep a MiG locked in a dogfight beyond 10 minutes, fuel starvation would force it to break off or fall from the sky. But the Vietnamese had no intention of staying that long. Target, 20 kilometers. Begin climb. Afterburner. Kiev shoves the throttle forward first. He follows. The afterburner roars to life. The MiG-21 rockets upward at more than 200 meters per second. G-forces crush them into the ejection seats. Peripheral vision collapses. Every breath turns into labor. 5 seconds pass. They punch through the cloud deck at 5,500 meters, and there, right there, 4 F-4 Phantoms, 800 meters ahead, slightly higher. Loose formation, heads on swivels, scanning for danger. But they're searching forward and above, not below. Kiev's targeting system snaps onto the closest Phantom. A clean, steady tone floods his headset. That American pilot has no idea they exist. A 1984 US Air Force study on Vietnam aerial combat confirmed it. American pilots reported zero radar warning before the attack in 68% of MiG ambush encounters. The MiGs flew too close, too low, too fast for the F-4's radar to register them in time. Kiev squeezes the trigger without a moment's pause. The K-13 atoll missile slides off the rail, ignites, and tears toward the F-4's white exhaust trail. The American sees it, far too late. He banks hard left, but the missile is already closing. The F-4 detonates. He watches every fraction of it. The fireball blooming outward, twisted metal cut wheeling through open air. The surviving 3 Phantoms scatter, hunting for whoever did this. But Q is already gone. Throttle chopped, rolling inverted, knifing back down into the clouds. He follows, glued to Q's wing. The 3 remaining Phantoms wheel toward where the MiGs had been. By the time the radar finds a target, there's nothing left to lock. Total exposure above the clouds, 12 seconds. They flatten out at 500 meters, pointed south. Fuel gauge flashing red. 4 minutes remaining. Gia Lam airfield sits 35 kilometers away. They touch down with 90 seconds of fuel left in the tanks. Ground crews are already gathered on the tarmac. They've been monitoring the radio chatter. 1 kill confirmed. An F-4 Phantom destroyed. Q steps down from his cockpit, composed, measured. This isn't his first. He climbs from his own aircraft. His hands tremble. His flight suit clings to his skin, drenched through. Not fear, pure adrenaline. The electric realization that this tactic actually delivers. He never fired a single round. Wingman duty, observing, absorbing. But he understood with absolute clarity, his turn was coming. That evening, Radio Hanoi broadcasts the kill. No names. But inside the Pentagon, analysts are scrambling to understand what just happened. Declassified US military records show that between September and December 1966, American forces lost 43 aircraft over North Vietnam. 8 of those confirmed MiG kills. The loss rate was climbing and accelerating. North Vietnamese MiG tactics were producing results. Nguyen Van Cock had just witnessed the proof with his own eyes. But the Americans weren't going to absorb those losses quietly. After watching MiG-21S ambush their formations through November and December 1966, US military analysts started dissecting the pattern. The MiG struck when F-4 Phantoms were tied to bomber escort duty, distracted, shielding the slower F-105 Thunder Chiefs. Pure F-4 fighter sweeps with no secondary mission? The MiGs avoided those entirely. Colonel Robin Olds recognized the gap. Olds was a veteran ace from World War II. 13 confirmed kills against Luftwaffe fighters. 44 years old, aggressive, deeply frustrated. He'd been running fighter sweeps over North Vietnam for months. The MiGs wouldn't come up to meet him. So he resolved to trick them into it. Operation Bolo. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. F-4 Phantoms would masquerade as F-105 bombers. Identical flight paths, identical altitudes, identical radio frequencies, identical electronic signatures. North Vietnamese ground controllers would read a standard bombing run on their scopes. Slow, vulnerable, ripe for interception. But when the MiGs rose to pounds, they'd find the sharpest fighter pilots in the US Air Force staring back at them. January 2nd, 1967, 2:45 p.m. Olds pushes out at the head of 28 F-4 Phantoms bearing toward Hanoi. They hold 4,500 meters, textbook altitude for F-105 strike packages. They transmit F-105 call signs. They trace the exact routes bombers normally fly. Down below, North Vietnamese radar operators watch the formation crawl across their screens. Every signature reads like another American bombing run. Standard protocol kicks in. Scramble the MiGs. 16 MiG-21S launch from Phuc Yen and Gia Lam airfields. Some of North Vietnam's finest pilots sit in those cockpits. They climb toward intercept altitude, expecting bloated, bomb-heavy aircraft with fighter escorts focused elsewhere. What they find instead is Robin Olds and 28 F-4s carrying a single objective: kill MiGs. The Vietnamese recognize the trap within seconds. Too late. Olds already owns altitude, speed, and positioning. The MiGs attempt their signature move: climb, fire, dive away. But there's no escape vector. Phantoms fill every corridor of sky. What follows takes exactly 12 minutes. Olds shoots first. His AIM-7 Sparrow locks a MiG-21 and tears it apart at medium range. His wingman scores another, then another. Vietnamese pilots break formation, clawing toward cloud cover. But Americans occupy every gap. 7 MiG-21S destroyed. American losses, 0. Declassified US Air Force after-action reports confirm Operation Bolo wiped out nearly half of North Vietnam's operational MiG-21 fleet in one engagement. It stands as the most successful air-to-air operation of the entire Vietnam War. A devastating strike against the North Vietnamese Air Force, but not a killing blow. Because Nguyen Van Cock was not in the air. He had orders to fly that day. His MiG-21 sat fueled, armed, and waiting on the Gia Lam tarmac. Minutes before launch, ground control pulled him, reassigned to a different patrol sector. Some historians call it luck. Others suspect Vietnamese controllers sensed something wrong. The American formation was too clean, too coordinated. Whatever kept him grounded, Cock survived. Operation Bolo forced North Vietnam to rethink everything. They grew cautious. No more large formations thrown at obvious targets. They waited, hunted for moments when American defenses stretched thin or attention drifted. Same tactic, sharper execution, more selective, more patient. The 921st Fighter Regiment disappeared from the skies for 3 months. retraining, recovering. The Pentagon declared Operation Bolo a decisive victory. The MiG threat neutralized. But was it finished, or had the Vietnamese simply learned discipline? When they returned to combat, what would that look like? On April 30, 1967, the Americans got their answer. April 30, 1967, 2:14 p.m. GL Am Airfield, Hanoi. 3 months since Bolo, and the 921st Fighter Regiment is operational again. The alarm blares, American strike package incoming. Nguyen Van Kok sprints to his MiG-21, but his role has changed. He's number 2 in a 4-ship formation now. His own target, his own kill. They launch, low altitude, clouds for cover. Ground control threads them into position. Target 20 kilometers. Begin climb. Afterburner. He pulls back on the stick, punches through cloud cover at 5,500 meters. 4 F-4 Phantoms dead ahead. He logs the second aircraft. Fires. The F-4 detonates. He rolls and dives back into the clouds. Total exposure 12 seconds. On the ground, the crew is already waiting. 2 kills confirmed. Nguyen Duy Kieu claimed the other. But this time, Kok pulled the trigger himself. That evening, Radio Hanoi broadcasts his name. The farmer's son from Nam Ding. His first kill. Between April and December 1967, Nguyen Van Kok flew 23 additional combat missions. October 3rd, kill number 2, an F-4D. October 7th, kill number 3, an F-105. November 18th, kills 4 and 5. 2 F-105S in a single sortie. Ace status. His face appeared on propaganda posters. Radio broadcasts named him Defender of the Sky. School children memorized his name. The Americans were memorizing it too. Declassified CIA reports revealed that US analysts began tracking individual North Vietnamese pilots. COC's call sign, Red 3107, surfaced again and again in after-action reports. He became a priority target. American pilots received specific briefings. If you spot a MiG-21 punching straight up through cloud cover, guns blazing at knife fight range, vanishing before you can react, that's him. Put him down first, everything else is secondary. But he made that nearly impossible. 60 seconds, that was his maximum engagement window. He never repeated a pattern, never accepted a fight unless the math favored him. December 1967, kills 6 and 7. December 28, 1967, kills 8 and 9. Double ace. 9 confirmed victories. The deadliest fighter pilot of the entire Vietnam War. He was 25 years old. Nguyen Van Kok never saw combat again after 1969. North Vietnam grounded him, not as punishment, but as preservation. They reassigned him to train the next wave of pilots. He outlived the war, rose through the ranks, retired in 2002 as Chief Inspector of the Vietnamese Air Force. His shadow stretched far beyond Southeast Asia. Operation Bolo and the MiG ambush tactics it exposed forced a reckoning inside the American military. That reckoning produced the US Navy Fighter Weapons School in 1969, the program the world knows as Top Gun. The dogfight wasn't obsolete. A farmer's son in an outdated aircraft had buried that theory for good. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and leave a like.